Okay, yeah, so good evening once again. So this is our fourth class, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so today we're going to be looking at classes and objects in Kotlin. Okay, so if you can see my screen, you just, kindly just raise a hand or use the chat box so I can actually know that you can see my screen. Okay, thank you, Zed. Okay, so today we're going to be looking at classes and objects, okay, in Kotlin. Okay, so let me just specify that. There are classes and objects in Kotlin. And like what I said the last time, we're going to be learning the language and applying it in building stuff, okay? We're going to apply it in building stuff so we can understand how it is also being used. So, and we're actually going to use the concept of, for some of us who play Ludo, okay, dice and everything. So we're going to use that, the concept of the dice game to explain classes and objects and the likes. Okay, so and we'll start by rolling of random numbers. Okay, this is something some of us have done, if not all of us. We have actually what's done. Okay, so because most games have a certain random element to them. Okay, so let's actually now, you know that to roll a dice, okay, we actually need a way to, represent the values, the valid values, okay? So for some of us who play Ludo, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 6. That's if it's a six-sided dice, okay? So that means the numbers from 1 to 6. Now, we've actually, I think in the last session, we looked into the data types like int and string, okay? But for the purpose of what we want to learn, we'll introduce some other data type called the int range, okay? It just represents a range of integer values, okay? That is what int range from the starting to the ending, okay? So it's actually a data type that's actually suitable for what we actually want to do. So like what I said, we need to be able to represent, to store the valid numbers of a dice, which is 1 down to 6. So we've talked about creating a variable, so I can just create a variable. I'll call it the dice range. And in Kotlin, okay, so we represent range like this. So this is 1 to 6, okay, 1 to 6. So if I'm to show you what this does, okay, let's print dice range. Okay, so for the run that, let's see. Okay, so this just gives us 1 to 6. Now, so it gives us the range of 1 to 6. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. Okay, now, so it starts with a 1. You can see the double dots, okay? And then, so that the 1 is the starting point, 6 is the ending point. Okay, you can have a range of 5 to 20, and the likes. Okay, so now if you notice, I did not have to specify this, the data type. Okay, remember we said we talked about type inference. Okay, where Kotlin, the compiler, is able to know that, okay, fine, since you're actually storing, it's saying this 1 double dot 6, it actually knows that, okay, this is a range of integer values. So you don't need to explicitly, declare that this variable is of integer range data type. Okay, so that's what inference, type inference. We talked about that in the last class. Okay, so now, just like our dice, okay, when you throw a dice, a random number pops up. Okay, you can actually, of course, it's going to be luck. Yes, I'm going to call it luck if you're able to say, I want to throw a 5, and then you throw it and 5 comes out. Of course, people will say that's a luck. Okay, it's your luck. Okay, so, but there's an atom of randomness. There's randomness in that. So how can we generate that random number. Okay, how can we generate that random number? So we generate that random number by calling a function called random function. Remember, we talked about functions. Okay, it performs a specific task. So there is an inbuilt function called random function, and what that function does is to generate what a random number. Okay, so I can create a variable called random number, and then what do I want to store? I want to store a particular number that I'm going to throw. I'm going to get when I throw the dice. And what our dice is from the variable we created, which is the dice range. Okay, this holds 1 to 6, so it's our dice. It holds a range of 1 to 6. It's our dice. So when we throw it, we should get one number, just one. You can't have two when you throw a particular dice. So how do we do that? So we'll call the random function. Now I'm going to explain this. Okay. So if you notice, I am calling this random function, okay, using this dot, but it's not called a dot, it's called a period. Okay, you can call it period. Well, people call it dots, okay? So, but we have a dot here between this variable and the function call. So you can actually just read this by saying we're generating a random number from the dice range, okay? So we use periods to call methods, to call functions on, a variable, okay? So for us to see this generated number, remember when we printed out, what gave us this 1 to 6 is when we printed out dice range, but dice range is a range. So it just gave us that range. So for us to see the random number, okay, I'm just going to say, so let's see what random number we're able to get. Print line, so I'm going to, okay, so let's use something like random number, okay. And then because I want to call the variable inside of this string, so I'm going to say random number. I'm going to use the pound sign. Okay. Another thing I can do is to put it in curly brace. Okay. That's okay. So when we run this, okay, did I use capital letter? Sorry, it's meant to be a small letter L. So our random number that is generated, okay, so is 2. When we run this again, so running it means we're like throwing a dice. So when I throw another dice, what do I have? I have a 6, okay. Let me throw another dice again, okay, I have a 4. So it generates, that's what this random function does. It generates random numbers, okay. So let's now talk about, so I just needed to explain that because we need that to now talk about the concept of classes and objects. Okay, so now we're going to create a dice class, okay? Now, first of all, what is a class? Okay, but before then, let me say this. Now, when you actually roll a dice, they're actually real objects in your hand. They're something you can touch, you can feel. They're real objects in your hand. Okay. So while this our code is actually working well, it's difficult to actually imagine that it's actually about a dice. It's, if you were just to jump on this, code, okay, without prior knowledge of what is being done, you may not really understand that, look, okay, we're trying to work out the whole concept of a dice, okay? So we need to be able to organize our program to be more like the things it represents, okay? That makes it easier to understand. So now all dice, they work essentially the same way. If you understand, they work, the same, whether it's a 5-sided, 6-sided, or whatever. They have the same properties. And what's one property of a dice is sides. Okay, every dice has a side. Okay, they have the same behavior. So that when you roll a dice, okay, you can actually you can roll a dice, no matter how many sides that dice have, you can roll it. That's a behavior. All dice have a behavior. they all have what? A side. So these are same properties, same behavior. So with that now, we can now create a programmatic blueprint of a dice that basically says that dice have sides and can roll a random number. Okay, so we can just create a blueprint since we know that. Okay, so it's just like you all know what a blueprint is. Okay, so a blueprint, for example, the blueprint to a 3-bedroom flat. 3 persons can have that blueprint, but what comes out of that blueprint, you understand, will have a different look, a different feel. I don't know if you get. So that's the concept of what blueprints. So this blueprint we're talking about is basically what a class is. Okay, so a class is just what a blueprint. That is just what a class what is. Okay, so think about probably, like we just said now, a house, an architect's blueprints, plans. Now, the blueprint an architect will give you for a house is not the house. No, that's not the house. It's just what they are, just instructions of how to build the house. Okay, they tell you, okay, fine, the windows should be of this length. You understand? Okay, the rooms, you have like 3 rooms here, this dimension, this width, and the lights. Okay, they are just instructions of how to build the house, but they are not the house. So the house is the actual thing or object that what is created out or according to the blueprint. Okay, so that's what the house is actually about. Okay, so so let's define a class. So how do you define a class? Okay, how do you define a class? So it's simple. You define a class by so we're going to do it outside of this main function. Okay, so to create a class, you just say class, which is the keyword, and then you put the name of the class, of which the name here is dice. That is the name of our class. Okay, now we can only put in the parentheses if we want to add extra information, but well, for now we don't want to. So I'm just going to create the body of this class. Okay, so this is where we get to write some certain instructions. Okay, so it's just similar to when we're creating a function where we use the keyword fun. Okay, so here class is the word keyword, and then you can use any name at all. Okay, but it's very important. The class should start with a capital letter. When creating a class, should actually start with capital letter. Functions start with small letter. Okay, but when naming your class, it should actually it should not be something that is difficult to understand. The user should be able to, or someone going through your code should be able to see the name of the class and understand what the class is about. Okay, so at any point you have a question, you can just raise your hand and I'll attend to that. Okay, so now inside this class, just inside the class definition, we can now specify, properties for the class. And we specify these properties using variables. Okay, so remember we said in a dice, there are certain things that, that are similar, same for every dice. No matter the dice, it has a side. Okay, no matter the dice, it has a roll function. It can roll. So so that forms part of our blueprint. Just like if you were to get a blueprint of a house, no matter the house you're building, at least there will definitely be a door. There will definitely be a door, an entrance. Very, very important. So that is common to all houses. There will definitely be a window. That's common to all houses. Okay. So what is common to all dice is the sides. They have what we call a side. So we are going to specify the properties for the class using variables. Okay, so of course, dice can have sides, can also have a color. It can actually have a weight rather. Okay, but we'll just focus on one for now. And that one is going to be the side. So I'm going to create a variable called sides. So I use a var sides, and then How many sides should this our dice have? Okay, we're using a 6-sided dice. So we'll say it should be equal to what? 6. This is it. We have just created a class. This is a very simple word class. We have just created a very simple word class. Okay, so the next thing now we'll talk about is objects. And so an object is an instance of a class. That's what an object is. So let's bring it down to the dice. Now, with our dice class, we now have a blueprint of what a dice is. But to have an actual dice in our program, we need to create an object. We need to create an instance, an object instance. Okay, so basically what I'm saying is, do you have a blueprint to a house? Maybe you want to call it duplex blueprint, duplex class. A duplex has certain properties that are consistent. No matter the kind of duplex it is, it should have this. So that's just a blueprint. But to get an actual duplex that somebody can live in, okay, we need to create it. So that means you need to use that, you need to call that plan, that blueprint. You need to make use of that blueprint to actually build a duplex. So when you actually have a duplex that someone can actually live in, that duplex becomes an object, an instance, a reference, an instance of that class, of that blueprint, because it has just come to life. Okay, so to actually create an object instance of a class, okay, we actually do that in the main function. Okay, if you notice, we created the class outside the main function. So we can do that in the main function. And you do it like you're creating a variable also. Okay, you just do it like you're creating a variable. And this is it. So I think I can just, let's just comment this out. Okay, good. So how do we do it? So I'm just going to say, I'm going to create a variable, a val rather, because we're not going to modify it. Let me just say first dice, or better still, I'm just say dice 1. So this is the variable, okay? It's not an object yet. For now, it's just a variable, val dice. So to make it an object, we now have to assign the class to it by just calling the dice class and then calling the parentheses. So with this, we have created an object of this word class. The dice 1 is now an object of this class, meaning that this dice 1 has every property. So let me use this instance also. Assuming you're working for a firm, let's say you're working for who would I use? Z Limited. Okay, so let's say Nedu is working for Z Limited. Now, if assuming KodeCamp is having an event, and we need Z Limited to grace that event, to speak, to be present. Now, it is not the company Z Limited that is going to speak. No, the company is just a name with a structure. But the company now decides to send Ned. Ned is now like an instance. So Ned is a reference. Ned is an object of Z. Z is the class. Everything, every property, whatever. That's why you can see one company can create another one in another place, another location, but they are all tapping from one headquarter. Okay, so now when Nedu is coming to represent Z Limited, he's coming and it is expected, of course, that since he's representing Z Limited, he has access to information that he can give. So he is just he's actually he's an object of Z Limited. He has the properties, he has the functions, the methods, he can give the necessary information that we need. So that's basically just an object and what an object what is. So to create an instance is just to what? It's just by me saying, Nedu, come and present here. So the fact that Z limited gives him that go ahead, go, is now represented. We have created an object. So we can have access to information about Z limited through Nedu. So we just create an object by just normal assignment, when you assign a value. So val dice1, and then you assign the dice class to that, okay? I hope that's clear enough. So now that we actually have these objects, okay? And the object, of course, is just what has been made from the blueprint. With that object, you can now access the what properties. That's why I said, since Nedu works in Z, if he's coming for that from Z now, from Nedu, we can now have access to information, okay, about Z limited. By the way, Z, if you don't have a company, you need to have one now. Okay, so that's just on a lighter note. Okay, so, but currently on this dice class, the only property we have is size. Okay, the only property we have is what? Size. So I want to now, so basically I want to tell dice1, okay, I've heard that your company dice have size. Can you show me how will the object access, how will Nedu assess that information? How is the object going to access the information from the class? So programmatically, I'm just going to say, so I want to print it out. So let me just use print line. So dice1, so to access the properties, we use the dots. Okay, we just use the period. So I'm just going to say dots, and then you can see sites is coming out as an option also, but you can also type it sites. So if I print this, I should see 6 because the site is 6. So I should see 6. Yes, so I'm seeing 6. So that is how an object can now access the properties of a class. Okay, I hope we are clear. I hope we are clear on that. Okay, so now next thing is to make the dice roll. Remember, we said every dice actually has the ability to roll. Okay, so let's make the dice roll. So, and it's going to be a function. So I'm going to say function roll. Remember how we create a function? The keyword, the name, the parentheses, of course, if you want to pass in arguments, you're free. And then you put out the curly brace where you now type in the instructions. Okay, so now let's move ahead. So what do we want to do? Okay, so the roll function, how does it work? So it's basically what we actually just did before. So it's just to be able to call the random function, because when you roll a dice, you need a random number, right? So I'm just going to take these two things, just cut this, and then I'm just going to put them here. So let me take out this. Yeah, so just going to bring this here. So I think, well, let's just take this out. Don't really. Let's just get the number. Okay, yeah. So the function, the roll function, what the roll function does is to what? Print out a random number. That's basically what the roll function what does. It's just to print out a random what number. So that means this class has a property and a behavior. The property is the site. The roll function is a behavior. Okay, so how can we then call it? How can we call this behavior to so we can actually roll the dice? So basically what I'm just going to do in so I can just comment this out. So in the main function, Remember, main function is where everything actually happens on the Kotlin playground. So in the main function, I'll then use the object. The object is what? Dice1. I'm going to say, hey, so the object is going to be the one to be able to what? Assess what is in the class. So I'm just going to say dice1 dot, and you can see our role method there. Okay, so well, let me just still leave this. So we can see this number of sites, and then you can see what it rolls. So when I run this, okay, so okay, so we have, okay, so yeah, I didn't take this, I didn't copy this out. So that's why we have this unresolved reference. So in this class, you can actually see this. So well, there are two ways I can do this, okay? There are two ways I can actually do this. Now, I can take this and put it here, okay? And then this will work. Yeah, so this gives us double 6. Oh, wow, that means 2. If this was Ludo, 2 of my, this thing is out. So if I run this again, we have a 6 and a 4. So 6 is the number of sites because we're printing the number of sites, and then 4 is what we get when we actually roll the dice. Now, another way I could actually do it, I may decide I don't want to use this variable. I can just use the range instead. How will I do that? I'm just going to say 1, 2, 6. This is another way to do it, and of course, that will still give us something. So 6, 4, 6, 6, and the like, 6, 2. I hope we're following. Okay, so now that is one thing. So basically what we're doing here in the row function, we are displaying the number. We are displaying the random number. Okay, we are displaying the random number. So, but I want us to do something. I don't want us to display the random number. We have the print there. I don't want us to display it from the class. Okay, because we are printing out the value of the random number in our row function. And that's good, but sometimes it's more useful to return the result of a function. To whatever called the function. It's more useful to return the result, so that probably you want to use that result to do something else. Okay, like a typical example, we could actually just assign the result of this row function. We can assign it, you understand, to a variable. You can assign it to a variable. What do I mean? I can say something like this. Here, I can decide to say val dice row. So with this, it takes the value that is being rolled and it stores it in this variable. So if I run this code, and basically, so we still have this print system, of course, we'll take that out. Okay, but let me see. If I to print the dice roll, I'll still have that the value that is actually being stored. So let's do something. Let's do something. I want to change our function to return something. So how do we do that? I want our function, I want to use a colon. I want it to return an integer. And that means I want it to return a number. Don't print, just return the number. Okay, return this number. So let me show you something. I'm going to run this, and of course, there'll be an error. So it says a return expression is required in a function with block body. So what this means is we have created a row function that should return an integer data type. So because we have created such kind of function, we then need to use, it needs what we call a return expression. It needs what we call a return expression. So instead of printing the random number, I'm just going to say return the random number. Okay, I'm just going to say return the random number. That's just it. Okay, so let me take out this print statement. Okay, let me take out this print statement. So instead, so this gives us the object. This is where we're creating the object. This is where we are rolling the dice and storing this. So let me run this to be sure we don't have any. So you see there's nothing printed out because we're not printing anything here. We're just returning. So when it runs this function, once it gets a random number, it stores it. We are now storing that value in this dice row. So to print it, I'm now just going to say print line. Okay. So let's make a statement here. So I'm going to say, so let's do something. So I can say my dice one, of course, this is the object. You want to use the object to access the sides. So my dice one dot sides, okay, which is my 6. That dice one dot sides gives us 6, right? So sided dice rolled a, then I'm going to call the dice roll. The dice roll variable, which stores the result of, when we roll the function. So if we run this, so you can see my 6-sided, so the 6 is the object calling the properties size, which is 6. My 6-sided dice rolled a, and then we are calling this dice roll, which is this variable. And this variable is storing whatever is being rolled, whatever value we get when we actually roll the dice. Okay, so now another thing we could do is to change the number of sides on our dice. We could change it because not all dice have 6 sides. Okay, dice comes in all shapes and sizes. So you can see a 4-sided dice. Yes, you can also see an 8-sided. You can also see up to 120. It's all dice. There's no constraint to the number of sides a dice should have. So what I want to do now is this. In our row method, okay, I want to change where we have this 1 to 6, because you see we had coded this here. So at every point, this dice size will always be 6. It will always be 6. So let's do this. So I'm going to change this from, instead of saying 6, let me just say size. So this size, remember this size is this variable that we created, this property. Okay, so at any point we change this number, it just reflects in our roll function. At any point we change this number, we don't have to go. So if we leave it at 6, we'll have to go to the function. But here we can just change the property, and the property, changes the behavior of the roll function instead of going straight into the behavior to actually do that. Okay. Now at the same time, assuming I can also come here and set something. I can set to say that dice one, which is the object, dot sides equals 15. What am I doing? I'm now updating what the sides should be on the main function. I'm like, okay, I want the sides to be 15. Okay, so let's now do this. So let me just okay, let's move this down here. Okay, so if the size is 20, so I want us to see something. So let's duplicate this. Okay, that's fine. So get the object and then we roll it. So let's run this. So you can see At this first instance, okay, at this first instance, our object, okay, that is one dot, we just got the object and then we called the row method. So when we call the row method is taking this size, which is what, 6. But in this second case, that's why I have my 6-sided dice row A2. But in the second instance here, this other line, we are now changing the value of sides. We are changing. So see this change as probably we asking Nedu, how many staplers does Z Limited have? Okay, and then he knows that Z Limited by default has 7. But all of a sudden I'm like, okay, take this 8. Take this 8 staplers. So it's no longer 7, it's now 50, it's now what, 15. So that's like an update. So you can actually now change, you can modify those properties. Okay. Just like it can be 7 in Z and he goes and says it's 4. Another representative of Z Limited can actually go and say it is 18. So that's to tell you that the objects have the ability to modify these properties, but it does not change the fact that those properties are true for everyone. Like, it is there. It's just their values and that can be changed. Okay. So are we any questions so far? Any questions so far? Abdul, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, let me ask you a question. Okay, now that you changed the, what they call it, the sides.
Yes.
Is it possible for you to have a different value? I mean, this time around, my 15-sided row sided dice rolled another number which is different from 2. I mean, which is different from the first 6-sided die. I don't know if you understand.
Guys, you're saying, is it possible for the dice to roll something different?
Yes, from the first object.
If it is, okay, you're asking if it is possible.
Yes.
Okay, so it's not. It's because of implementation. So this is it. Now, when we are running this, okay, the only thing the dice roll, the roll function here in this main function is called once. We are calling it once. And then, of course, now listen, we notice something. We are using the same dice roll here, which is what was stored here. So it's the same. So if you want a different one, we now have to call it for this particular site. That's when you get a different one. But if you notice I copied the print statement from here and we are calling this dice roll. And this dice roll was called just once and the value was stored here. So we are just reusing it. So if we want to get a different value, we now have to, call it for this particular one. I can just do a, and here I'm going to make it dice roll 2. So this particular rule now is for this particular side. Okay, so so that's where you get something different.
Yeah, I understand now. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so there are any other questions? Okay, the none. Okay, so let's move on. So let's add some customization. Okay, let's just see what we can play around with. Okay, because the idea of a class is to actually represent a thing. Okay, maybe something physical in the real world. That's the idea of blueprints. Okay, because you want to represent something. Okay, so a dice class should represent a physical dice. Okay, so in the real world, actually, dice cannot change their number of sides in the real world. Okay, in the real world. So if you're imagine you're playing a Ludo, it's 6, you can't change it to 7. You can't attach another number to it in the real world. Okay, so if you want a different number of sides, you actually just need to get a different dice. Okay, you need to get a different dice. So in program now, okay, it means that instead of changing the size property, okay, instead of changing the size property of an existing dice, okay, because this is now, dice 1 is an existing dice now, this object. So instead of changing this size to 50, instead of changing it, okay, what we can do is we could create a new dice object. A new dice what object with the number of sides we need. So what am I saying? Instead of changing this dice 1 to 15, I can actually just create another object. I can just create another object by saying val, another object is now dice what 2. And then let dice 2 now be the one to have 15 sides. That's basically what we're saying. Okay, let dice 2 now have that. So there's 2. Okay, so okay, yeah. So that's actually that. So this, we're looking at real world scenarios, okay, because one dice cannot have 2 sides. If it's is that a 6-sided dice or it is not a 6-sided dice. So let's modify this now. I want us to modify our class, our dice class, okay, in such a way that you can specify the number of sides when you are creating the object. Now, you notice when we created this class, it already had a side, number of sides, which is 6. But I want us to update it in such a way that when you're creating the object, you can now decide, the size is not created by default. No, when you're creating the object, you can now decide what the number of sides should be. So how can we actually do that? So this is how we do that. I'm going to take comment. Well, I can just comment this out. So how do we do it? I'm just going to add a property here. I'm going to add a parenthesis. I'm going to say val sides. Let me say sides of type int. So I've created a property. What am I saying? That this dice class should take a side, and that side should be a number. So when you're creating an instance of this class, you must provide the number of sides you want this dice to have. That's basically what we are actually saying there. So, well, we can actually let me just comment it out instead. Okay, so I can now fix, so the range, okay, so the range is fine since it's still going to use these sides. Okay, it's still going to use these sides to make the necessary calculations. So, but let's run this code now. Let's just run this. Yeah, so there are errors. So first error, it says no value passed for parameter size. That's the first error. No value passed for parameter size. What's it saying? This dice class, when you created it, it has a parameter. It has a parameter. So you need to pass in the value of that parameter. So second thing here, and then of course, you can see this error, val cannot be reassigned, excuse me. So we created a val here, and then we wanted to now, remember our, okay, yeah, val cannot be reassigned. So I think that should, so dice 2 is a val. So you can't reassign it except to make it a var. So if we do that, at least we should have that other, okay, which other one? Yeah, the sides. Okay, so sorry, it's actually seeing this one. So if I change this to a var, yeah, that particular error goes out. So, but let's leave it as a val because of course you can't actually change the size. It's constant. So how can we fix this? It's very simple. Okay, we fix this very simple. So it just means that when we are at the point where we're creating this object, we need to pass in that property, the size. So for this dice 1, we want it to be a 6-sided dice, and dice 2, we want it to be a 10-sided dice. So I don't need this again. I don't need this. Okay, so we also don't even need this dice range, do we? No, we don't. So we can actually see my 6-sided dice rolled a 6, my 10-sided dice rolled a 5. So we modified it so that when you're creating the object, you're also creating the number of what sides. Okay, when you're creating the object, you're creating the number of what sides. Okay, so I hope that actually is clear. Yeah, I hope that's actually what's clear. So let's do some. Now, one thing that's very important, okay, it's not enough to write code. It's not enough to write code. You need to adopt what we call good coding practices. Okay, you need to adopt what's called good coding practices. Now, a typical example is, if you look at this, we have a variable called random number. Okay, this random number variable, and then we are returning, random number directly. So this is actually, remember when we talked about variables, we say variable is just a container. So think of it this way. Why should I have a, and remember, when you create a variable, you're creating a space in memory. So if you have a lot of variables, means you're taking up a lot of space. So basically what I'm saying is, if a variable, we said a variable is like a container. So imagine your house, you have 15 buckets. Okay, you have 15 buckets, 15 variables. They're going to occupy space. So you need to try as much as possible to reduce the number of variables in such a way that you're still able to, store and make certain operations. So we can actually just, since this random number is consistent here, we can decide to just, get rid of it. And then what are we returning? You can just get rid of this, because basically we're just getting the random number. So instead of storing it, I can just do what? Return, this. Return what? The random number of 1 to whatever the side is. Give me the random number from 1 to 6. Give me the random number from 1 to 7. Just return that. Okay, that's one. Now, the next place we can actually do stuff. Let's see. Okay, so in this our string, this our print line. Let's look at this. So we are getting, let's see. Well, I think this is, so that's to the side. Okay. So if you notice, we stored this dice roll. This roll, the result of this roll function, we are storing it in the dice roll. Okay, so that's also storing, you are creating a variable, it's space. So why not just, just delete this. And then I'm going to do this, call this here. I'm going to replace this here. And then same thing here, just, so someone has his hand raised. Okay, I'm coming. And then take this out. So don't need to create a variable. Okay, so let's run this and see. Do we have any problem? No, we don't have any problem. So this is more concise. Okay, it's more concise. Abdul, go ahead.
Okay, my question is, I don't know, maybe it's the programming language I was learning before. Is this passing argument inside the class, is it acting like a constructor? I don't know. Or there's another way in Kotlin to write a constructor.
Okay, so now for the idea of a constructor, okay, for the, I don't know the language used, but let me a typical example is constructors actually help you to, I'm trying to see if I can, bring it down a bit. So assuming I can create a constructor for this dice class that now has 2 properties, right? I can create a constructor that has 3 properties, right? And then if I want to make use of it, now I have the leverage to make use of probably the one I want to create, the class I want to use, okay, I want the one that just has sides. Maybe in another place I want to use it, I want the one that has sides and color. Because when you create an object, okay, when you want to actually use a class, okay, there are certain situations where you must put the required properties. So constructors help you to, have flexibility to, use a particular class with just a particular set of properties. Now you will see that a lot when we come to writing some more code, especially in Android Studio. You see some classes where it's the same name, but you see that one has 5 properties, one has 4, one has 3, one has 2. So yes, it actually acts as the constructor. Okay, to answer your question, it actually acts as the constructor. But the beautiful thing about Kotlin, you don't really have to, you can actually declare a constructor, but it's not something we really do often. But yes, you can. So if to make it clear to you, yes, it acts as a constructor. Okay.
Oh, all right. I understand. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other question? Any other question? Any other question? Okay. So in the absence of none. Okay. So that's just for good coding practice. Actually, that's just for good coding practice. Any other question before I think how much time do we have? You know how much time we have. Don't know if we can actually go into something else. So this is basically, about classes and objects. Of course, I wanted us to be able to, not understand it, okay, use it and understand it, with something we can relate, something we can actually relate with, okay, with something we can relate with. Okay, so any question one more time before, let's see. I wouldn't know if we're able to finish. If I start this, if we'll be able to finish it, I don't think, but let's just do it sharp. Let's just start. So let's now implement this in Android Studio. Okay, let's see if we can implement. Let's implement this in Android Studio. I think we have about 40 minutes or so. Yeah, let's implement this in Android Studio. So so let me share my Android Studio. Okay, so let's create a new project. So I'm going to go to File, New. Okay, so an empty activity. So let's call this Dice Roller app. Okay, so I'm going to create a new folder for you guys. Okay, and then of course we use Kotlin, and then okay, so let's close this. Okay. Okay, so please confirm you can see my Android Studio. Hello, can you see my Android Studio? You can actually just raise your hand if you're seeing it. That's
Yes, we can.
okay, okay. Okay, thank you. So, okay, that's fine, that's fine. So let's apply this in, building an application, a nice application, or let's just apply it, okay? So let's go to our layouts, okay? So I can just, so one of the things needs to learn some shortcuts. So if you highlight this, you actually just do Control B, and it takes you to that, okay? Control B. So let's go to the design view. Now, okay, so we have, I want to add a button, okay? So we have not actually talked about buttons, okay? So remember we said that everything on the screen, okay, there are views, okay? We talked about that, we said there are views. So Now, a button is just like your view. So it's a view actually, just like, we had a text view. Okay. So let's add a button. Now we already have our container, which is our parent layout as constraint layout. So this is a button. So I'll just click and then drag this. So let's just drag this below. Okay. So by default, it gave us a right and left constraint. Okay. Remember, so it gave us a right and left constraint, but we still have an error. So if I open this up, you see it is not vertically constrained. Okay, it is not vertically constrained. So we need to constrain it vertically. So the top, I'm just going to take the top to the bottom of the hello world. So you can see top of button to top of text view, top to text view bottom. So of course, I want the bottom. Okay, so that's actually fine. This is okay. So I think this is okay. So let's see how this is just going to run this. So while that is running, so let's make some changes. Okay. Now one of the changes we're going to do, so let's make, instead of having button, okay, I'm going to call it role on the text property, and I'm just going to click enter. So yeah, so have role. Then what else can we do? Of course, remember this whole warning stuff, okay? Remember the whole warning. So it means that we need to extract the resource. So you can just click on fix. Okay, that's good coding practice. Okay, yeah, so that's just that. And then let's move on. Now, the one more thing we need to do is to give it what we call an ID. Okay, so the ID basically is just so this has an ID called button. Okay, well, we'll talk about it. Yeah, definitely. But let me just say, so it's just like your name. Okay, if I want to access you, if I want to call you, I need something to call you, right? So I call Ned, I call Zed, I call Abdul. So every view, so when you give a view an ID, okay, it's like so you're able to call the view and get it to do stuff. Okay, so I'm just going to do some changes to the text view. Okay, so like the size, and just give it a 30 SP. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, so so the text style, okay, is actually normal. So now the next thing I'm going to do, I'll change this. Let's change this text from hello world. Let's change it to 1. Okay, good. So of course we still have the warning, so fix that. Okay, so that's fine. So let's now move on. So this is where it gets interesting, okay? Because now we want to actually write code, okay? The last time we just stayed on the design, but now we actually want to, write code. So so the writing of code, of course, just basically we want to start giving instructions so that stuff is being done. So we do that actually in the main activity class. This is where we do it. So let's talk about activities, okay? So an activity basically provides the window in which your app draws its UI. If you want to talk about UI, talk about user interface. So it just provides the window in which your app draws its UI. So typically an activity takes up the whole screen of your app. Okay, it takes up the whole screen of your app. So every application has one or more activities. Every application. So the top level or first activity is often called the main activity, which is what we are seeing here. Okay, and it's what it's given to us by the project template. Okay, so now, for example, when the user actually scrolls on through the list of apps on their device and types on probably our dice ruler app, the first activity that is being started is the main activity. just like we had the main function main, fun main. Same thing here. This is the first activity that the Android system will start up. So in this activity, we need to provide details of how the layout, and how the user should interact with it. Okay, so now in the anniversary app you did, or in fact in the picture and stuff app that we did, the anniversary one we did the last time, okay, there is just one activity that displays birthday, anniversary message and then image. Some of you did profile and the likes, okay? So in this Dice Roller app, we have just one activity that displays a text view and a button. So we can have more applications, multiple screens and the like, okay? Just so each activity actually has a specific purpose. So a typical example is that your gallery, okay, your application, when you go to your gallery, okay, your gallery application, you could actually have an activity for displaying just a grid of pictures. You could now have a second activity for viewing an individual picture, okay? And then you can also have an activity for editing another picture, okay? So that's that, okay? So let's move on, okay? Let's move on. So now I know you may not understand a lot of things here, so but I'm going to try as much as possible to do justice to it. So we have already talked about a class. So when you see this, you know that the main activity is a class. We know about this stuff, the colon, when you want to. Okay, so basically it's just an extension. So it means that this activity is extending from, we'll talk more about inheritance and the like. It's extending from what we call the app compact activity. That means it's drawing, it's like a child. Okay, it's like a child. So we'll talk about that. Okay, so I don't want to overshoot. So if you notice in our main activity, there's nothing like main function, just like we're doing in Kotlin. There's nothing like a main function there. Okay, because we talked about the fact that in our Kotlin program, there must be a main function. But Android applications, they work differently. So instead of calling a main function, the Android system calls this onCreate function. Remember, these are keyword, font, and then name. So the Android system calls the onCreate function, okay, of this activity. So when you open it for the first time, okay, it calls this function. Now, if you look at this function, now we'll learn more about override later. Okay, so don't worry about it. But the rest of this other method where we have this whole thing, okay. Now, for some of you, well, you're looking at this import. Well, the imports basically is just now Android actually has numerous classes, inbuilt classes, okay, that helps making writing of code easy, okay. But it actually needs to know which of the class you mean. It needs to know which class you actually mean. So that's why you see some of these things. So when you see, here we actually see app compact activity, we're not saying import. So it's importing this. So to know that, oh, okay, fine, it is this particular one you actually need. Well, as we move further, we get to, use that. So you can enable auto import, okay? You can actually enable auto import. You can just do that, so that whenever you call a class, type a class, it can import that for you. It actually does that, but you can actually, in case probably yours is not doing that, okay, you can just go to File, okay? You can go to, new project settings, okay? Settings for new projects. Well, let's see, I think, yeah. Okay. So I can actually just search for, so when you go to settings, you can just search for auto import. You can see auto import on completion, okay? And that you can see add unambiguous imports on the fly, optimize imports by the like. So you can even check this, okay? Can check this also, and then apply that. So that helps import, whenever I call a class, it helps you import it automatically. So the first thing we're going to do is, let's modify application so that when you click on the button, okay, it will display a message. Okay, when you click on a button, it will display a message. So let's do that. So I'm going to write a code inside our onCreate function. Remember, our create function acts as our main function. So we're going to write our codes there. So I'm going to write this code and then I'm going to explain what it does. So I'm going to say, so if you notice when I typed button, it helps me import this automatically. So one of the things I would advise is when you're typing, okay, try as much as possible to, once you see when you start typing and you see the option come out, just click enter. You don't have to type everything. You don't have to type everything. Okay, so what have we actually just done here? So first things first, you know about this. You should know this. This is just variable declaration, the whole of this. Val, the variable name is role, and it is of type button. So the type of this variable is a button variable. And the button, remember, you know, the button is a view. So that means this role variable is a what? View. Okay. Now, the next thing you may be seeing, of course, you know this sign. This is an assignment operator. So it means we want to store something here. Now, but what is this find view by ID? So just as the name implies, it finds the view by its ID. Just maybe you want to find your brother. Of course, if you want to find something at home, you find it with its name. So you may ask, please, have any of you seen my phone? Have you seen my sister? Your name? Have you seen this? Have you seen that? There's something used to reference what you're looking for. Okay, so that's what this method does. It finds the button in the layout. It finds the button in this layout. It comes here and it finds that button. And what does it use? It uses the what? ID. Find view by what? ID. So this r.id.button, okay, this is the resource ID. Now this guy, if I highlight and do a Control B, you see it takes me to this place. If you look at this, let me close this out. You can see the ID here is what? Button. So assuming I change this to role, maybe add an underscore, okay, click enter. So that means I'm renaming it. I'll search in comments so I can rename it everywhere. You see, it changes this guy to show that they are linked. Okay, so the r.id.row button here is the resource ID for the button. That's what you use to call that button. That is the unique identifier for it. Okay, so basically the code, what this actually does is to save a reference to the button object in a variable. And what's the variable called? The variable is called what? Role. That's basically what this line of code is actually just doing. Okay, so it saves the object, not the button itself, just an object. Remember, we're talking about object, just an object. So with that object, with this role object, we can now access every property, every behavior, which is a method or function that a button has. Okay, so note this, okay, Android automatically assigns ID numbers to the resources in your application. Okay, for example, this our role button, okay, it has a resource ID. And the string for that button text also has a resource ID, which is this guy. This string, this one that you're seeing here, that we typed one, it has a resource ID also. So Android automatically assigns that. Okay. So let's move on. So let's move on. So this is what we now have, okay? So the next thing is this. How can we need to now associate code with the button. That is basically we need a code that can be executed when the button is tapped. Okay, so in Android, there's what we call a click listener. So a click listener is just some code for what to do when a tap or a click happens. We call it click listener. It's listening for from the user to what click. Is listening for the user to what click. So what we'll now do, I'm now going to use this object, this row, okay, and I'm going to use the dots. So with the dots, like I said, you now have access to the behavior, the methods of this button view, okay? So there's a method called set on click listener. Now I'm going to take this one, the very first one that has this curly brace, and not the second one. We'll talk about that. We'll talk more about much more higher functions. That's lambda. We'll talk about that. So I'm going to click enter. So remember, like I said, don't type everything. Just once you see the one you're looking for, which is the first one, I'm going to click enter. Okay, so don't bother about some of these things. We'll dive into them much more. So now within this curly brace, that's where we now put our instructions for what to do. So immediately we did row.set on click listener, it means that our button is now active. It's now listening. We have given it the ability to listen for a touch or a click. Okay, so what do we want to do when the user clicks on that button? What do we want to do? So this is what we want to do. We want to display what we call a toast. Now, a toast is just a brief message that appears to the user. It doesn't stay more than, well, we have short and long. Okay, so how do we do that? We do that by saying, I'm going to create a variable called toast. Okay, and then I'm going to call the toast class, which is this toast dot, we have what we call make text. And then now, these are the three things, okay? It needs a context, a text, and duration. Don't worry, I'll really get to explain some of all these things. But for now, just take it. So I'm going to pass this as a context. I'll explain this as we move on. And then it needs the message that you want to display. So of course, that message has to be put in a quotation mark because it's a string. So I'll say dice has been rolled, okay? And the next thing is the duration. How long do we want this toast to be displayed? So I'm just going to say toast dot length short. So we want a very short length. So after that, I will use this variable I created, which is the toast. And I'm going to call a method called show, toast dot show. So that is actually what that. So let's run this and then see. Okay, so I think I need to share my whole screen so you can see my emulator. Yes, so, okay, it's applying changes. Okay, let's reinstall and restart. Okay, so yeah, we're ready. So once we click on roll, we should see a toast message below here. So when I click on roll, you can see it, dice has been rolled for a short time. So we have been able to add some interactivity to our application. So when we click on roll, because we have set an on-click listener, the button is now ready to listen for a user clicking or touching. So when we click that, we now display so when you click it, these are the instructions. I want you to display a toast. And the toast message should be dice has been rolled. Okay, so that actually is what that. Now, but let's move a bit further. Hopefully we can actually finish this. So let's move a bit further. Now I want us to update, the text view. Okay, when we click on this row button, okay, let's update the text view. No, it's still displaying 1. So, but we can actually update the text view. Okay, so now we come back here and click on this text view. We can see that our text view has an ID called text view. So I can rename it. I can say random number, because we're displaying a random. Okay, let me just say random text, whatever. Let's just use whatever. Okay, so I'm gonna click enter, search in comments, so it can actually search for wherever it was actually text view before, so I can correct that or just refactor that. So just like we got a reference to the button, we will now get a reference to the text. Okay. So I'll just duplicate this. So you do that by just doing, or when you come to the end of the line, you do a Control D, you duplicate. So here I'm going to call this text result. Now, the text result is not a button. It's not the type of this text result. Type of this variable is not a button, but a text view. So I'm just going to do that. And then for the find view by ID, what is the ID? The ID name we said was random text. So this saves the reference to the text view object in a variable. So now we have this. Now we have this text result object. We can now, play around with it. We can update stuff. So how do we do that? So I'm just going to put this here. I'm going to say, so when we click inside this on click listener, so that means when we click on the button, I want the text. So I'll just say text result. I'm calling the object dot. So there's the property called text. You can see in brackets here from get text, set text. So with this property, you can actually change the text, or you can actually update the text or set a text, or even get any text on that text view. So I'm going to say text result.text, and I'm going to assign a new text to it. So since it's a text, okay, that is a string. We have to put this in quotation. So I'm going to say 7. Or since we are dealing with dice, let's say 6. Okay. So this is actually similar to what we did, when we are setting text using the attributes, on the design place, when we are setting text. It's actually similar, but this now we're actually, doing it programmatically. We're actually now writing, doing it in code. Okay, so setting this explicitly, okay, just means that for now the text view will always display what 6. That's what it actually means. So let's run this and see. So instead of 1 that we are seeing here, okay, now what happens is this. Because I put it here now. Yeah, because I put it inside of this row, this on click listener, it means that when I run this application, it will still be the same way it was. But once I click on it, will show me the toast and then change this. So let's see if that works. Yes, it does work. It changes it to what? A 6. It changes it to what? 6. So I want to do one more thing. Let's take out this text property. Okay, let's take out the text property. So when we run it, there's nothing there. When we run it the first time, there's nothing there. Should be empty. Yeah, but when we now click, the 6 appears. So that's actually how to, update that. Okay, any questions so far? Any questions so far? Okay, so I believe we are all following. Okay, so let's do this quickly. Yeah, we're rounding up. Let's do this quickly. So basically what we're doing is we're going to now transfer everything we learned from the, function, the Kotlin code that we wrote. Now, I'm going to go back to the class where we can actually, keep on writing our code. So we now want to add the logic, okay, where we had the row function in the Kotlin playground. So we want to implement that randomness here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, remember, we had, so we're going to create a class. Okay, so let's create that. But remember, we had a class that had number of sides. Okay, since I'm sharing my full screen. So remember, we had this. Okay, we had a class, number of sides, and then the roof. So we won't bring this. Okay, So this is what we're going to do. Let me just copy this. Okay, let's just copy this. And then let's bring it down here. Now remember, this is a class, so I'm not going to put a class inside of a class. Okay, I'm not going to put a class inside of a class. So let's do this instead. So let me just drop that here. So we can actually just delete this. So this is what we had then. This is what we actually had then. So we now have a class which has this and everything. So how do we then use it? Okay, how do we then make use of it? Okay, so if we have this on the line here, if you look at this, there's this stuff here. So when I hover on it, it tells us something. Say property sites could be private. Okay, so now when you mark this as private, you're basically making it accessible only to this class. Means that main activity class cannot access this site. Only it's going to be accessible only within this. So you can actually just do that. Okay, and that takes out that error. Well, not really an error actually. It's just like a pop-up or warning. Okay, so the next thing is to create the roll dice method, because what we have done, we've added the dice class to our application, but we need to update our main activity to use it, just like we used after creating the class. We now used it in our main function. So we now need to use it in the main activity. Okay, so instead of this, okay, instead of this 6 here, I'm going to call a method. That means I'm going to just, when you're getting a return, a return stuff, okay? So instead of this, I'm going to just use this method. I'm going to just use this method. So I'm going to create this method that will get the value of a random number, and then that value is now what is going to be stored here. Okay. Let's just take this out. So let's use this. So let's just call the method. On the when you click on it, it will run this function here, or this method rather. So I can just create the function by coming down here. Of course, you see it's showing a red warning, unresolved reference, because this roll dice is not anywhere on this class, so on this file. So I'll just create the function. So it creates the function for me here. Now, what's the next thing we can now do? Okay, let's now do something here. So I'm now going to, inside this function, okay, inside this function, I'm going to create an object of this dice class inside this function. So just like we did, so I'm just going to call this var, I'm going to say dice. It's going to be, I'm creating an object now of the dice class, and then I need to give it a side. So I have to, that's why it's showing us here. I'm going to now say 6. So that means the side is a 6-sided dice. Then I'm going to get the result when it is rolled. I'm going to get the result when it is rolled. And how do I do that? I'll use the object to call the roll method or roll function. So then, now this whole thing I did here for the text view and the likes. So I'm going to take it out of here. Let me put it in this function. So that it is when I roll the dice that we now get to make use of the text view. And then text results, just like we had before, dot text. So once set the text, and what are we setting the text to? It will now be dice roll. But look at something. This dice roll, just by the side here, you see that it is of integer data type. Okay, so if I click enter, you see it gives an error. And when I hover on it, what does it say? It said type mismatch. It required a character sequence. but instead it found what it saw was what? An integer, an int. So we can convert an int to a string. So that's why you see this add to string call that is giving us as a suggestion. So once I click that add to string, and then the red line under it goes out. It goes out. So this is basically what we have. So let's run this and see if everything still plays out the same way it should. So reinstall and restart. Yeah, so when I click on roll, yeah, we have a 4. Click on roll again, we have a 6. So we have that random number, just like we had, just like the code. But now we have created an application that actually does that. Okay, so finally, okay, good code practices. Okay, adopting good code is very important. We get to talk about these things now. There's I'm going to drop I think I'll drop a link. I just hope I remember. There's what we call an Android style guide. Okay, it kind of is just ideal for, you need to write, especially when you're working with a team, you need to write your code in a similar way so that there's some form of consistency. Okay, that's why Android actually has a style guide for how to write Android code. Naming conventions, formatting, and other good code practices. So I'll drop that link. So let's clean up our code. So first things first, I can take out, well, even if I don't, I can take out these tools, but let's leave it since we're actually doing making use of it. So one of the things we need to try to do is to make our code, have a shorter number of lines. For example, you can see this. Assuming I take out this toast, I don't want to use this toast. Now, this from here 17 to 19. This is 17, 18, and 3 lines. Okay, I could just make this a 1 line. You understand? It's just 1 line now. Okay, so you need to be able to condense your code, making it more concise, shorter number of lines. Okay, now because since the instructions for the click listener is just 1 line long, so you just condense it. Now another thing is reformatting your code. Okay, so in reformatting is just to make sure that it follows the recommended code formatting conventions. Now, we can easily just do that, okay, I can just do a Control A to highlight everything, and then I'll now do Control Alt L. So it helps to format it. I don't know if you saw the difference, but I'm going to do a Control Z to undo. You can see, and then when I do Control Alt L, so there's changes. Control Z, Control Alt L. So this is based on reformatting your word code. So the shortcut helps you to actually just follow that. Okay. Now another thing is, another very important thing is also, we've actually done it, commenting your code, because comment helps you to describe what is happening in the code. Just like you have, this is a comment. Okay, this is a comment. It helps you to describe what is happening here. Helps you to describe what's happening here. So commenting your code also is a good coding practice. Okay. Like for example here, I can decide to add a comment for this line and say, here I am creating, let's say create new dice object with 6 sides. So that's me commenting this. So when someone is going through your code, you know that, oh, okay, I'm creating an object that has 6 sides. Okay. For this one, for the ones below, I can say, update screen with dice roll. That's what these other lines of code are doing. So comments is actually what's good. So that's basically that. Okay. So we've been able to add a button to an Android application. Okay, using our layout editor, we have been able to, do some modifications to our main activity. We talked about an activity is and how to add interactive behavior to an application. We're able to display a toast message. Yeah, we're able to display a toast message. We're able to set an on-click listener for a button, okay? So that we can add a behavior when a button is clicked. What else? So we're able to update the screen, by calling methods on the text view, just like the text view.text, okay, to change the text and everything. So we're able to comment our codes and reformat our code just to clean up that. So this is actually that. Any questions? We'll round it up now. Any question? Okay, so well, in the absence of none, we're going to move. This is where we're going to round up. In the next class, we'll be looking at conditional statements in Kotlin. We're looking at conditional statements in Kotlin, and if by God's grace we're able to finish that, if we're able to finish, that, then probably we'll now apply it in an Android application. Okay, we'll create an application that will actually just apply what we have learned. Okay, so that's going to be all from me. Okay, so if you have any questions, okay, you can actually just ask on the Slack channel, okay, and I'll do my best to respond on time. Okay, so that will be all.